Constitutional Convention Part 2, we were just introducing James Madison. Yes, he really was a short guy. Remains the shortest man ever to be President of the United States. Sometimes I throw in just little human interest stuff. I pose the question, do opposites really attract? Madison didn't marry at a young age, but he eventually married a woman who was his opposite in more than just the normal ways. She was very personable. She was gushy. She was popular. She would go on to become our first superstar first lady when Madison became the fourth president, Dolly Madison. I guess opposites do attract. They complemented each other wonderfully. Okay, um, Madison had read all this stuff and thought deeply about it, and he's capable of that. And he had generated a list of a dozen or so features he thought the new government should have. And if I'd covered the background, I would have told you this. I'll have to call it up anyway. Congress had reluctantly summoned this convention, but Congress was afraid they might go off into space and write a whole new constitution, so they tried to keep them from doing that by summoning the convention for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation. Between the lines, starting from scratch and reinventing government was not authorized. Madison is way past that, as it turns out. And I'm going to roll back a little something that you would have read in the supplement, that Madison was proposing a three-branch government. I'm now not sure of that because late in the convention they decided kind of as an afterthought to add a judicial branch, so I can't really say he's proposing a three-branch. But he had an executive branch, he had the two-house Congress, he had checks and balances, he's got all this stuff. There's more. Madison took notes using a specialized type of writing known as shorthand. I couldn't look you in the eye and tell you anybody anymore can do that because that's what you do when you don't have recording devices. Court reporters used to use, with a court reporter, I don't mean a journalist, I mean the person who keeps a complete word for word transcript of the court proceedings. They had them even then. They would use shorthand because you could do that. It was a very fast form of writing using symbols for words, and probably only the shorthand writer could decode it. But James Madison gives us a word for word transcript of who spoke and what they said in that whole convention. Okay? He's our eyes and ears inside that locked room with the sentries at the door. Some other delegates took notes, but none are as comprehensive as Madison's. The Congress elected a secretary, but the record kept by the secretary only notes who spoke and when, not what they said. So Madison used to be called the father of the Constitution. That's probably a stretch, but it goes to show his importance. I think the other delegates had great respect for his great knowledge. He's a world-class expert by the time he gets there. He's the first out-of-town delegate to arrive in town. They also seem to have resented him a bit because he almost never was allowed to serve on a committee. Okay, he might have been a very skilled behind-the-scenes operative, but he's not that much of an orator. But many times people who opposed his views were just left like their arms hanging down at how he could just cut you to pieces without raising his voice. Okay, so James Madison, at the time he was shaping what has since become the world's oldest written constitution, was 36 years old. Okay, the next on my list would be Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was the most conservative man in a very conservative room. He was one of 3 New York delegates, and about halfway through the summer, the other 2 New York delegates got fed up and packed their bags and headed back to New York to try to sound a warning. Most who left didn't do that, but it's 1787. We got no mass communications here. But that meant it would take, if there are 3 delegates, whether they're or not, it would take 2 in agreement to vote. So Hamilton could not vote. He doesn't really contribute substantively to this. why he's on the list is that he's the dude that kicked the pebble that turned into the landslide. Had he not persuaded the handful of delegates that showed up for the Annapolis conference the previous year, had he not persuaded them to petition Congress to summon this convention doesn't happen. Hamilton was remembered for this hours long speech where he was pleading with the delegates to set it up where the president would be elected for life. That would have been an elective monarchy. So he has a vulnerability to criticism on that. Alexander Hamilton was approximately 32 when the convention took place. Hamilton may not have known the exact date of his birth, but he knew the year. The third one is a man with a very odd name, and I'll tell you how he got it, and you've never heard of him. Gouverneur Morris. I'm guessing at the pronunciation. Who would name their little baby boy Gouverneur? Well, there was a tradition in some families, which I believe remains today in some families, that the firstborn son's given name will be the mother's maiden name, maiden last name. It keeps the name in play. So that's what happened here. He was a New Yorker serving as a Pennsylvania delegate. He was a close associate of Robert Morris, same last name, no relation, a man known eventually as the financier of the Revolution. And so Gouverneur Morris, peg leg ladies man. What? The fact that Gouverneur Morris spoke more often and at greater length than any other delegate is not enough to get him on my little list here. Even the fact that Gouverneur Morris was the most outspoken, brusque, take no prisoners critic of slavery is not enough to get him on the list either, but it comes close. If they'd done something about slavery, it would. What gets him on the list is that when you read the Constitution, you're basically reading the words of Gouverneur Morris. He was a member of something called the Committee on Style, which was set up when the convention's just about done. They have adopted 23 resolutions. That's just 23 resolutions. It's not a document yet. And so they handed their 23 resolutions to the Committee on Style, and the committee handed them to Gouverneur Morris, and he's the dude who dipped the quill pen in the inkwell and put it into words, taking the 23 agreements and crafting them into seven nicely done articles, as he calls them, which are vague where they need to be vague and precise where they need to be precise. It's a masterwork. It's not an original composition or anything close to it, but he just did that lawyerly work. The only criticism anybody ever had was that the Constitution never either mentions or invokes God. So, but it's a secular document. Why would it? So, and he again was in his mid-30s when this was all done. Okay. If you read any number of books about the convention, and I've read several, or textbook chapters about it, and I've read quite a few of those, you would get the idea that all they did was argue all the time, and they did. There were a lot of controversies to be settled, and nobody's going to be really totally pleased with the outcome, because there's so many wounds that are inflicted just getting this figured out. But what you might not grasp is that there were several things that virtually all the delegates agreed upon, and hence didn't have to talk about. Do people have discussions about things they agree on? Well, they don't have arguments or debates. We call this areas of consensus. Consensus means general agreement. These didn't come up in debates because they were all standing on the same place. Now, the things they agreed upon that they brought with them general agreement. Some people have got the idea they had a convention before the convention and hammered out some agreements. That's not what I'm saying. The things they agreed on naturally were more basic and more important than the things that they disputed about. For example, this is not the first one listed in the supplement, but I'll put it first. There was very general agreement on the need for a stronger central government. Got to strengthen the central government. That's what this is about. So there's agreement on that. That means they have a basis to stand on having a serious disagreements on how to strengthen the government. You cannot compromise whether. What would you do? Just strengthen it a little and call it off? You can't compromise whether. You can only compromise how. And that was the tough one. But they were able to overcome their differences and arrive at enough consensus to get it done. Okay. Another thing is something that I don't think was necessarily there at the beginning, even though I said, did I say prior consensus? Maybe I didn't. And that was seeing all this from a national as opposed to a local perspective. Now, granted, virtually every man there, with the possible exception of Hamilton, who was not from any, well, he was from New York, but I don't know if he had that deep of an attachment. They were there to make sure their state didn't get screwed by whatever was cooked up. That's job one. Whatever it is, we're just going to make sure we don't get a short end of the stick. And but as they worked on it, and they were very serious about getting this done because they're scared. Okay, the difference reason this one has high attendance and a somewhat similar attempt the previous year did not. There'd been a major uprising, armed uprising in Massachusetts the previous summer, 1786. And what, this could happen there, it could happen anywhere. This could get out of hand. We got to do something. We got to get this stronger. But the only way to do that, given all the interstate and intersectional jealousies, was to cook up a document that was satisfactory to everyone. You don't do that unless you're looking at it from a national as opposed to a local or regional perspective. All right, there's another one that may sound odd because it involves an unfamiliar use of one of our political holy words, democracy. The delegates generally shared a fear of democracy. The air quotes because they didn't see it quite the way we do, and they did not. It was not a positive word. It did not have a positive connotation to them because in their minds, democracy was a code word for mob rule. And the word mob did not necessarily connote a bunch of rock-throwing rioters setting fires. The mob was just the common people, the uneducated, unwashed common people who lack the knowledge and wisdom to participate meaningfully in national affairs. So they thought it would be a mistake to have excessive democracy. They know they got to have some. They know they've got to have some to give it legitimacy. But there's really not much democracy in it. The only democratic element of the entire Constitution in its original form was the House of Representatives being elected by the voters. Members of the judiciary are appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. Senators were chosen by the legislatures of the states. The president and vice president were elected indirectly, and they still are. So, democracy, you have to have it, but its usefulness has to be viewed in light of its potential for destruction. Like, did I say like fire? I meant like fire. Democracy is like fire. It can cook your food. It can also burn your house down if you let it get out of hand. So we'll be looking at some of the implementations of this later. Finally, the question of whether or not in a new system the states would be allowed to continue to print their own money. Under the Articles, Congress could print money. So could all 13 states. You got 14 different kinds of money washing around. And so there are two sides on this, the sound money side and the paper money side. And I'm going to put that on top of Constitutional Convention Part 3.